morning. My name is Joel Heising, and I've attended Gateway for about 20 years. I am serving on the worship team as well as the Gateway Choir and Orchestra. Our text this morning comes from Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3 and verse 15. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. In verse 15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. This is the word of the Lord.
We find ourselves again in these very familiar texts that we've been in for the last couple weeks. We're here for one more week, all with good point. I can tell you 3 stories. First is of Julian. Julian is a respected mechanic. He works tirelessly in his shop. He manages parts, he cleans up, works with his employee schedules 6 days a week. He handles an endless stream of repairs, often considering working on Sundays just to catch up with his paperwork. Yet his family commitments and exhaustion weigh heavily on him, leaving him wondering if there's a better way. Lois is a busy stay-at-home mom. She feels incredibly spread thin through managing her kids' schedules. She volunteers extensively in her church by leading groups. She's singing in the choir. She's running errands for the staff. Though she's filled by her contributions, she's rarely home. She feels an increasing resentment in her heart for others in her community. She only knows how to describe her life as being full. Then there's Larry and Sally. Larry and Sally are grandparents. They're retired. They enjoy spending time with their grandkids. They travel, they explore, they go hiking, they go biking, they do all the things that they can do. And they feel happy about their lives. They feel a growing emptiness, however, as life continues to go on, as they're starting to miss the connection that they once had at their church. They were once deeply devoted and deeply connected in their ministry, but now they feel a little bit forgotten. And they're wondering now if they've been missing something on this path of their lives. Well, we live extraordinarily busy lives, don't we? And I'm sure if we all here in this room and online, we got sharing about all the things that we do in this life, we would talk for a long time about all the good and incredible things that we are all able to contribute towards. But I think we'd also be collectively surprised, and perhaps equally not as surprised, by how we might identify, and in many more ways than we could ever think of, with these 3 stories of busyness. Well, last week, Pastor Justin introduced these 2 weeks as we turn the corner into chapter number 2 of this incredible book of Genesis, as we explore these 3 opening chapters. He explained how we are turning this corner and how God starts talking about these 2 elements of life that we busy ourselves the most with, and that is of work and that is of sleep. And we're seeing that we've muddied up the waters. We've muddied up the balance, perhaps, between the amount of work and the amount of rest that we take. As I think we're busier than we ever have been, yet I think we're doing less. Our weeks are fuller with many good things, but yet we still feel empty, and we still feel drained at the end of the week. So author and speaker Ruth Haley Barton, she writes about how we've been approaching Sabbath in a couple different of her books. And she sees a difference between the patterns of being both good tired and another pattern of being dangerously tired. I feel like we might know what good tired is. You've done your job for the day. Perhaps you've built a house. You've milked 100 cows. You've cleaned your house from top to bottom. You've gone about visiting and caring and loving for people. And at the end of the day, you feel tired. But it's a good tired because you've done something good in this world. You've contributed in very positive ways to taming the chaos of this world. You've made a good contribution to the Lord's work, and you feel tired. And that's a good tired. But then Barton writes about being dangerously tired. And I suspect some of us have been there too. I know I have been there personally. It's when we know that we've gone too far and we don't know what to do about it. It's when we've been working for the last 7 days a week, for the last 2 to 3 months, maybe even more, and we're not even sure how to stop that rhythm. We've spent every other waking hour making sure our home and our lives are just all in order, that everyone has got to where they need to go. They've all returned at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, we're just exhausted. But the only thing we know is to keep on going. Barton puts dangerous tired this way. She writes, excessive stress occurs when the demand made on me exceeds my reasonable capacity to fill them. It's when life is asking from me more than I can give back to it. And I wonder if anyone here just said, hey, that's me. Well, this was never God's design. This was never the point of creation. And all that we're describing here, and some of the things we'll explore through here, is what life looks like for us following the fall of humanity into sin. And so with our ancient eyes, we need to go back to look at what God was doing there on that seventh day, looking at those verses again. Let's look with our ancient eyes as best as we can. Genesis 2, verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So we're going to ask a few different questions of this text. First is, what is the Sabbath? Well, as we read these verses, we read the word rest. And it's the Hebrew word Shabbat, or as we would call it, Sabbath. And I think we quickly miss the point of what God is saying here because we're looking at it with our modern eyes. And when we see the word rest, we think that God took a nap after cleaning up the kitchen table, to use Pastor Justin's analogy. After setting up the game, he went off back to his room and he put his feet up and had a nap. That's what we might think that this rest entails. So we're told on the first 6 days of creation that the heavens and the earth were finished, all the host of them were completed, and on the seventh day, God rested. Or shall we say, God Sabbathed. Now, to be sure, God didn't rest because he was dangerous tired. He didn't rest because he was good tired even. As Kat this, omnipotence doesn't tire. He didn't rest because he was exhausted. He rested because he had finished all that he had set out to do, and he was now able to oversee the normal operations of this earth. And it would continue in such a way under his ever so watchful and ever so present eye. Then we're told in verse 3 that God blessed the seventh day. And we've talked about this for the last couple of weeks, how God blesses the animals, he blesses humanity and says, go be fruitful, go multiply, fill the earth. They figured out how to do it and they've done it. Here we are today. But then he blesses time. And as we've explored how, just in a surface way, all of the other creation accounts that the Babylonians are sharing, all the other Egyptians are sharing, is that at the end of the day, deity, the God of that particular story, they made humanity out of conflict, and they set humanity on this earth to do their work. And meanwhile, they go off into the bedrooms and sleep. Well, God says to us that by blessing this particular day, he's going to join humanity in all of their activities. He's going to watch over them. He's going to love them. He's going to care for them. He's going to dwell with them. Verse 3 finishes off by saying, so God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy. Well, we've seen this chart for the last couple weeks as well, where it explains the 7 days of creation, but we see on days 1 through 6, there's this rhythm and there's this pattern, there's this flow to how all the days come. God speaks, creation responds, God pronounces it as good. There's a time frame that's announced that there is evening, there's morning, and then God numbers the day. This is the rhythm that happens through the first 6 days of the creation story. But then as we observe day number 7 come across to us, we see, no, bring it back. We see that there are a whole lot of blanks when it comes to the pattern. As the pattern is broken, the pattern changes, the whole pattern alters for a point. And all of our early readers that are reading this text and interacting with this text are going to see this point blank, that day number 7 is incredibly, vastly different. There's this major detour that happens on day 7 where this pattern breaks. And it's all there to show us that something is very special about this particular day. As God points out to us that it's to be set apart. This particular day is to stand out differently. This particular day is to be extraordinarily special. And what's neat is that it even comes up in the 10 Commandments. So again, as Moses is getting instruction for how the Israelites are to live and how to interact with each other, they're told this in the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day it is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And on it you shall do no work. Skipping down to verse 11, it says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. So in all creation, God doesn't have a physical temple. There's no idol that could represent him. And there's no one person short of the coming Jesus Christ that could represent him. There's nothing else in all of creation that could tangibly see or hold or capture any element of God's essence. And he blesses time to be a part of that. Another pastor and author, a guy named John Mark Comer, he puts it this way. And he says, the Sabbath is our cathedral. An interesting way to think about it, I think. The Sabbath is our cathedral. So I put it this way in your note sheet, that the Sabbath is a cathedral in time that points us to God. The Sabbath is a cathedral in time that points us to God. Reading this had brought myself back to 2009 when my wife and I, we traveled through Italy. If you ever get a chance to travel through Italy, it is a stunning country, a bucket list item for my wife and I. And so we did that. We started up in Venice, we traveled all the way down to Syracuse, went back to Rome, and then flew home. But as we went through from Venice all the way down to Syracuse, back up to Rome, we basically stopped in every town's cathedral. And it was mind-blowing, the intensity, the size, the grandeur of each of these particular cathedrals. But as we took in these cathedrals, as fantastically large and as grand as they told God's story of his greatness, we always got this overflowing feeling that these figures, these relics, these paintings, these elaborate floorings couldn't describe God's glory in its fullness, in its awesomeness, because nothing man-made, nothing human-made could ever capture the entirety of God. So I still think it's fascinating just to consider that the cathedral is our time that we get to spend with God. But I think we're forever missing the point of the Sabbath. Because of our history with this special day, it's been caught up in what it's not. So the second question I want to ask this morning is, what is the Sabbath not? Well, first off, the Sabbath is not just a break in the week. So I came across this pretty fascinating TED Talk. Where as one guy, his name was Pico Iyer, he was delivering a talk called The Art of Stillness. He's a journalist, he's a travel writer, and he talks about being sure that we must take breaks in the patterns of our weeks. So that in these breaks, our imaginations can do what their imaginations need to do, and that is to imagine, to conceive, to think back, to reflect, to think forward on all these wonderful things. And I agree with Pico. He's onto something, especially for himself, who's a writer and a journalist in a non-religious world where he's just discovered that rest is actually paramount to growth. It's actually absolutely necessary when it comes to our life's trajectory. But I feel he completely misses the point, in that he assumes that this rest that he's talking about, this break that he's talking about, is all just about the inner self. It's just about me. That it's just an intentional break for myself. Well, I think he's partly right, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I think he fails to see that the Sabbath, this break in time, is more than just a day off. Second thing, Sabbath is not just a day of rules. And so the Israelites knew the first 5 books of the Bible, what we know as the Pentateuch. They described it as the Torah, which is God's law. And as they were given this law, the Jewish leaders understood it as this was how they were called to live as a set-apart nation. But they were looking for more details. They're looking for more under ways as to how we actually live this out. So these early Jewish leaders, they saw that extra clarity was needed. They're hoping for it. And so they wrote an additional document called the Mishnah. This Mishnah then comprised of all of their thoughts towards what work could be. And they listed for the fourth commandment every conceivable idea of what work might be. And they've made it a law for themselves amongst this Jewish people. But the thing is, this Mishnah is not necessarily God's law. Only the Torah was. So everything else that they wrote, everything else that the Jewish leaders did was tightening up their lives so that they could be ultra sure. They would double check, triple check, quadruple check all of their lives so that they knew that they wouldn't mess up. All that to say is when Jesus goes into the New Testament, I didn't write this down, but this is a cool connection point here. When Jesus in the New Testament, he's going about his healings on the Sabbath days, and is mentioned a lot of times. What's key to note is that the Pharisees always get angry with Jesus with doing this work on the Sabbath. But they weren't angry that Jesus was breaking any of the 10 Commandments. It's that they were angry that he was breaking the Mishnah, which was their laws, not God's laws, which is a fascinating thing to think about. All that to say, God asked that we keep the Sabbath day holy and that we keep it special. Now, I think that does still limit some of our actions, but it's not about a whole list of do-nots and things we shouldn't do. It's about the freedom that we get when we remove all other life's distractions from our lives. So does that mean that we maybe think about doing our errands on a different day? I definitely think so. Does it mean that we don't necessarily drive to our family who lives in Surrey or Hope, Kamloops or Vancouver? No, I think we still go. Number 3, the Sabbath is not just a Sunday. So I grew up in a home where mom and dad on Sundays didn't go to work. We didn't do chores around their house. We dressed in our Sunday best. We didn't go out for lunch, and we certainly didn't do any shopping. And I think that pattern was good. We also had Danishes and chocolate milk for every Sunday morning breakfast. My family now, pretty much life looks the same. For me, as I'm a pastor in a church, so Sundays feel a little bit more different. It feels a little bit more like a work day, so I do my best for myself to treat Saturdays a little bit differently. But in our family pattern now, Sundays are a carved out special time. But God never mentioned the days of the week as we know them. They're just numbered. And as they're numbered, the Sabbath was the 7th. And as you look at our calendars, the week starts off on the Sunday, making the 7th day Saturday, which begs the question, why are we here today and not here yesterday? Sidebar, bit of a question here. We gather on Sundays because it's Resurrection Sunday. Every Sunday that we gather, because Christ rose from his grave, rose from death on the Sunday morning, we celebrate Christ's defeat over death every Sunday morning, and that's the beautiful thing. But life's patterns are a little bit different in the 21st century, aren't they? There are a number of people who have no choice but to take a shift on a particular Sunday. Last time I checked, cows still had to be milked, birds still had to be fed. And last week, as I was driving home from church, there was an ambulance that went by in full emergency mode, flying past me. These people still have to work. So my encouragement, if that is you, you still need to find some pattern, some way, shape, or form in your week to find that rest will be found, that glory will be given to God, and that there will be a chance to gather with God's people to celebrate Him. There's a lot more that we could talk about there, but we'll carry on. Third question we're going to ask. Now, how are we to observe the Sabbath? What does this now look like? How do we actually live this out? It's a good question, and I'm glad that you asked. As there's 4 ways we can understand this Hebrew word, Shabbat. And those 4 ways help us define our approach to taking Sabbath each and every week. First, Sabbath means to stop. And so I'm curious, when was the last time you actually stopped? And I mean an actual stop where you took a day and you turned off the worry about your office. You didn't think about the crumbs on the floor because you cleaned them up yesterday. Or you sat on your couch or in your favorite chair and you didn't go rounding around with your errands and all the things you must do. You didn't think about the garden that has to be cleaned up. You didn't think about that nagging to-do list that is just driving you nuts. But you literally sat down and stopped. You simply stopped moving. And I know who I'm talking to. I'm talking to a lot of people who love doing life. And so I know this whole element of stopping is hard to do. As when we work, we enter into patterns of partnership with God in taming our world. But when we stop, we first remind ourselves that it's not us that's actually doing the work in the first place. It's actually God living and breathing and functioning through us as we go about our day-to-day routines. And second, when we stop, we actually exercise our trust that He's going to keep on doing His part, with or without us. And that's okay. And that's okay. In fact, I think this is such a beautiful thing. This is us remembering that God is in fact sovereign and that we're only human. This is us reminding ourselves that God is God and that we are not. And I know sometimes that's difficult to get us to think about, but in His sovereignty, He's taking care of all the things, even when we take a break, when we stop. The world keeps turning. So this gentleman, Pico Iyer, in his presentation called The Art of Stillness, he talks about the need for empty spaces. He talks about the need for empty spaces to exist in our lives. And these empty spaces are found in all kinds of ways. He talks about how these empty spaces are found in a pause in music, about these empty spaces being found in the space after a period in a book. He talks about the white space found on a magazine page or a newspaper page. But he also talks about how these empty spaces are also even found in our spoken words, where we actually stop and we reflect. And Pico says that as we encounter these empty spaces, that our imaginations finally have the time to reflect on the life and the world around us. These empty spaces, or in a broader sense, these Sabbaths, is us stepping back from our complex lives and getting some more perspective on as to where we are really at in this life. So the same guy, after traveling the world, writing about his experiences for many years, he writes this. He says, "In the age of acceleration, nothing can be quite so exhilarating as going slow." Nothing can be quite so exhilarating as going slow. And Sabbath means finally, or secondly, not finally, we've got 4 to go. Sabbath means second, to rest. So my family, we love camping. We make sure we carve out 2-3 weeks in a year. We'd carve out more if we could to make sure we're on the road, seeing this world, and traveling within it. From planning a trip to booking the sites to the packing to the travel to worrying about the truck if it's going to make it this time or not, whether the tires on the tent trailer are going to explode or not, to setting up and getting there. Camping's a lot of work. And we typically don't stop setting up our campsite until everything's in place. A chair comes out, a cooler opens, and a beer perhaps in the hand, my feet up on the empty fireplace, a book that I'm reading, and it falls to my chest and my eyes close. It's a beautiful moment that I just love as I feel truly in a place of rest. As everything now is in place and I can now come to do what I've come to do. And it's not about the napping, it's not just about the cold drink, but it's about enjoying the time with my family, where we get to explore, where we get to walk and we get to ride, we play games, we chat, we read books, and we eat chips. And it's us resting. It's us resting together. I sometimes feel, because it's need another holiday, usually after those holidays, but it's still us resting together. So earlier, Joel, he read also Genesis 2:15. Genesis 2:15 says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it." And I was struck the other day as I was looking up all the Hebrew words that comprise this text. And we've been surprised a number of times throughout this series about how much an understanding of the Hebrew language and some of the specific words actually really help us sink our teeth into what God is saying to us through these words and how the original audience really actually heard them. And for me, as we read this text, the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden. We understand that word put, like I just take this water bottle and I put it on the table. It's a matter of fact. I literally took the bottle and put it on the table, and I'm going to continue to talk to you about this text. It's been done, it's complete, it's finished. It's a really non-fun way to think about it. But this word put, as we read this line, isn't what it actually is. This word put in the Hebrew language is actually the word nuah, which means rest. Fascinating. Any other time this word put is used in the same story, it's literally put. But this time at verse 15, this word put is this special word called nuah, which means rest. Which means we could read it like this. The Lord God took the man and rested him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. Now, this particular word nuah has a slightly different emphasis than the word Shabbat, as nuah has this emphasis of being a place of goodness, a place of no hardship. You might even say it's a safe place. And so it's less like me putting this bottle up on the table and more like me placing a baby in a crib. And as I place said child in a crib, I'm placing said child with love, with care, with attention, making sure that their head is supported, the back is supported. I'm watching every single movement as I'm slowly getting them down to their mattress. And then I slowly lie them there. And I slowly back away, hoping that they stay asleep, hoping that they don't cry out. But if they do, I go back and I pick them up again. And God says to us in this particular word here, he says, this is the rest I want for you. This is the rest I am leading you towards. You are not some bottle that I just throw on a table. You're a child I lay down in a crib. And I hold you. And I lovingly place you there. And I'm going to watch over you as you go through this life. And I think so often we forget and we don't even know this picture. And we so often, when we think of rest, I think we think rest is laziness. It's us being unproductive. Got a special quote for you here. It's from this lady named Marva Dawn, a theologian. She says, rest is about making the movement from idolatry to faith. Going from a place of, I'm the only one who can do this, and therefore I should, to a place of, out of my rest, I will be able to do it later. From a place of, I'm the only one who can do this and therefore I should, to tomorrow's another day. We can do it tomorrow. You see, this rest that God wants for us, it gives us this ability to pause. It gives us this ability to breathe and then to be productive, but in the right time and at the right place. Thirdly, Sabbath means to abide. And so the Israelites, this nation, as we pick up with where they get this particular book, again, we've been talking about, they've just been released from this land of Egypt where they've served as slaves in complete bondage for 430 years or so. They're now freed. They've spent their generations making bricks upon bricks without breaks. They've had to face harsher demands as their numbers of their nation continue to grow. And I'm sure as they were making those bricks back in Egypt, they were always looking down. They're looking at the straw. They're looking at the mud. They're looking at the completed bricks as they went away to whatever building project. And there was more straw, more mud, more hands, more work, more sweat, more labor, more whipping, more beating. They continually looked down, lacking confidence that anything of this was ever going to change. Hardly looking up and barely even seeing each other. Then as they gained their freedom through the crazy stories of the 10 plagues, Moses leading them towards the great sea where God parted the sea in the two and they walked through on dry land. They got to the other side. I pictured God saying to them in that very moment, he says, you are not machines. You are not robots. You are my human replications. You are my human reflections. He says to them, look up and see me. Going back to Barton. Barton writes, we have gone from looking up and around, having that confidence, to constantly looking down. Talking about my family a lot, so here's one more. Pam and I went out for dinner back to the keg a while back, thanks to a very generous gift that we received. And we were excited because we got a table in the very back corner. It was nice and dark, nice and quiet. It was just us two and a couple of small little tables around. And as we took our seat, we ordered some wine, started having some sips, looking at the menus. We noted a family that was beside us. This family, there was 4 of them. They were seated there too. And as we started talking about our lives and the things that are going on for us, these 3 members of the family that were sitting beside us, they were just doing this, literally the whole time. As we ordered, we started talking. We were talking about our kids, talking about our jobs. We were celebrating also our 20th anniversary, so we reminisced about being married for 20 years. We took notice at the family beside us, and they're still just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. All their meals came and went. And the dad at the table, not scrolling, just sat there. And I'm sure he was enjoying his meal because, steak and lobster is not a terrible thing. But I'm sure he was not enjoying his time. And at the end, everyone got up, he paid the bill. And I swear, as I saw him pay that bill, I saw a sadness. I saw a disappointed look on his face. And I wonder if God ever feels the same about us, as we're constantly looking down. As he's cleared the table, he's set up the game, and he wants to play it with us. He's sitting there, he's eager to have us join him. And yet we're off somewhere else, looking down, scrolling perhaps, thinking that it's my 7th day, I gotta keep doing the stuff. The paperwork has got to be done. The people still have to be cared for. The kid has got to go from here to there and think about all the things. And God's still sitting at the table like, just, where are you? I want you to abide with me. I want you to play the game with me. That's why I made the game. Just like how he was waiting for the Israelites to join him in the wilderness. The 10 Commandments come to us also in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5. And what I find fascinating about the chapter Deuteronomy 5 version of the 10 Commandments is that there's this extra little line in there that he speaks to the Israelites. Deuteronomy 5 verse 15 says, "You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Remember, I brought you away from there. Remember, I set up this game for us to play. But you forgot about that. And the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. I need you to remember that I saved you," God says. But again, we're constantly looking down, not confident in ourselves, and certainly not confident that God will even be there when we look up. We've forgotten what he has done for us. And we've forgotten that as Moses speaks to Joshua, as they're starting to transition some of their leadership, Moses says to Joshua at Deuteronomy 31, he says, "It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you. He will not forsake you." He's going to be at that table to play the game with you. He's not going to abandon it. Finally, Sabbath rest means to worship. And this may be the most obvious of all of these Sabbath meanings, so we're not going to spend a lot of time here. As we regularly offer ourselves before the Lord in worship, from how we are gathered here today to the way in which we approach our work and how we approach our routines, to how we study and examine God's world, how we parent our children, those are all forms in which, yes, we worship the Lord. But the point of the Sabbath rest here, the Sabbath worship, is to point us back in gratitude for what God has done for us. Namely, the provision of his Son through his Spirit, who died and received life as his resurrection and saved us from the sin. We're to respond in gratitude for all that he created, the earth and all that we get to call home, the humanity, our families and our friends that we get to share these moments with. We're to respond to the Lord in our Sabbath worship as in gratitude for all that he has provided for us. So we've been talking a lot about what the Sabbath is, talked about what the Sabbath is not. We've also talked about how we enter into developing and deepening Sabbath patterns in our lives. And I think there's one more question for us to even to consider. And I hesitated with even sharing this one because I wanted just to leave it there on a good note, that these are all the things we get to do. But I want to ask, why is the Sabbath so hard for us to observe? Why are these patterns so hard for us to navigate and to really enter into? We are driven people, aren't we? We love accomplishment. We love getting stuff done. We love being able to, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the year, and say, look what all I've been able to do. I get it. I love working with my hands. I love building things and putting things together and stepping back and be like, wow, look at that. I wish I could do that all the time. We're driven people. And I think we're also driven by obligation. We're driven by I have to and I shoulds. We're driven by this hard work that we need to have in our lives. But in the same breath, we're terrible at asking for help along the way. Sometimes we're even pretty bad at playing with others as we do all the things we do. I think, too, we're trapped in a life of performance where all we're wanting to do is just seen by the others around us rather than living authentically just for the Lord. I think, too, we have all these blurry boundaries around us where we don't know where to say yes and we don't know where to say no. I think also we live in a world where we have every piece of information available to us. Yet we also live in a world where we are still battling our own unresolved wounds. We still carry around hurts. We bear our grudges with almost pride as we carry the bags of it on our backs. We don't do much about it. Well, the Sabbath is hard because we're too stubborn to accept any reality of our selfishness. The Sabbath is hard because we're too stubborn to relinquish control of our lives to the Lord. Even as I typed that out this past week, I felt this pit in my own stomach. I'm perhaps the last guy that should be talking about relinquishing control. Pastor Justin can tell you more. My wife could also agree. I don't share too easily. I don't ask for help all that easily. I don't want to give up the control that I have in my own life because I want to be in control of my yeses and I want to be in control of my nos. But not taking a Sabbath rest on a weekly basis is us looking at a piece of art with our noses pressed right up against it. Just take your hand for a moment. Put it right up against your nose. Yeah, you look all funny. It's pretty great. I've always wanted to do that. But as you look at your hand, try to actually focus on the wrinkles, on the fingerprints, on the crevices. You can't, unless you have super crazy human eyesight. But everything just becomes a blur as you get your hand right there. That's us not taking a break. That's us not stepping back. That's us not taking Sabbath. As we can't make sense of the colors or the pixels of this particular art piece. We can't see the wrinkles. We can't see the lines. We can't see the callus. And it's tiring to look at. And the harder you strain to see it, the blurrier it gets. At least my eyes do that. And so taking a Sabbath is taking that ever so important step back from this masterpiece, that ever so important step back from our hand, where we get to see a perspective that's different from where we were once. And we get to see how we fit into the fuller picture. We get to see the brushstrokes in front of us and how it connects to the brushstrokes beside us. And you end up seeing this amazing tapestry that's more than just yourself. And taking a Sabbath is us getting refocused on who we are and upon whom we belong to. And while the Sabbath might not be everything that we've thought it to be, I'm here to tell you it's a whole lot more. Jaden earlier said it's November. Surprise, it's November. I hope you all had a good sleep in this morning. Season of Advent is coming up, just 4 weeks away. Sorry to bring up Christmas already. But no one ever wakes up on Christmas morning with a sense of, what am I going to do today? It's Christmas morning. You've been preparing for it for the last 4 weeks. Or if you're my family, we already have gifts in the closet. We know what places we're gathering at. We already have a table runner on our kitchen table that has some Christmas decor on it. Shh. It might be packed up later on, though. She just bought it yesterday. But we're excited. We're making plans. You might even already know whose gifts you're buying for who. But on Christmas morning, the mess is now to be made. The time is now to be enjoyed. Christ is to be celebrated. And that's Advent. That's huge. That's big. Our years are surrounded by us looking forward to Christmas. But what if we were to approach Sabbath in the same way? Maybe slightly different, I don't know. With the same idea. Where in the week ahead, whatever the day you need to do, you get your errands done beforehand. You get your visits and your activities all planned out. You get your lives organized so that when that special day comes, because I don't know if you've noticed before, but these special days, they keep coming. There's a pattern, there's a cyclical nature to our weeks, and these days still come. And when that day does come, that we're ready to unplug. We're ready to practice the presence of being with our family and being with our friends. We're ready there to enjoy a moment where guilt-free we can put our feet up on the coffee table. We can let that book fall to our chest. And we can let our eyes close knowing that this is a good moment. Cormer writes this. He says, "For 6 days we rule, we subdue, we work, we draw out, we labor, we bleed, we wrestle, we fight with the ground. But then we take a step back, and for 24 hours we Sabbath, and we enjoy the fruit of our labor. We delight in God and in His world. We celebrate life, we rest, and we worship."